hppodcraft.com.
Hi, folks, and welcome to our coverage of I Am Legend.
Just a quick note before the show starts. I made a little boo-boo on this one, and I recorded with the wrong microphone. So my audio's a little like the societal change in the theme of this book. Not entirely bad, not entirely good, just different.
There is nothing wrong with your listening system. There is just something wrong with Chad.
But if I could take the opportunity to make something right, in this episode, we talk about the music mentioned in the book, all real classical music, except for one piece, The Year of the Plague by Roger Lay. When I put together the playlist from the book, I actually scoured the internet for this thing, discovered that it was entirely fictional. Until now.
What?
As penance for my mistake with the microphone, I have recorded The Year of the Plague. You know what they say, when life hands you Draculas, you make Draculade. That's what I've done, and I hope you guys will enjoy the episode. Stay tuned for the song at the end of the show.
On those cloudy days, Robert Neville was never sure when sunset came, and sometimes they were in the streets before he could get back. He walked around the house in the dull gray of afternoon, a cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth, trailing thread-like smoke over his shoulder. He checked each window to see if any of the boards had been loosened. After violent attacks, the planks were often split or partially pried off, and he had to replace them completely, a job he hated. Today, only one plank was loose. Isn't that amazing? He thought. As he pushed open the front door, he looked at the distorted reflection of himself in the cracked mirror he'd fastened to the door a month ago. In a few days, jagged pieces of the silver-backed glass would start to fall off. Let 'em fall, he thought. It was the last damned mirror he'd put there. It wasn't worth it. He'd put garlic there instead. Garlic always worked.
Those were the excerpts from Chapter 1 of the vampire classic I Am Legend by Richard Matheson.
Whew, that was dramatic, Chris.
Yeah, well, I feel dramatic, man. I love this book so much, I gotta give it some gravitas.
Well, you certainly did. And we're going to be giving it a lot of gravitas here on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast, also known and this summer to be exclusively renamed Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I'm Chad Fife.
And I'm Chris Lackey. We're here at hppodcraft.com and Patreon. This is our free show of the month. So if you want to take this ride through the whole novel all month, please consider subscribing.
Because, folks, you know what time it is. Marches for Draculas. Our reader this month will be Eric Peabody, a voiceover artist and the man behind Viking Guitar Productions, mixing and mastering your music and custom audio solutions for your podcast and audiobook needs. He's the best.
Oh, God, yes. He's so good.
Man, you are bringing the gravitas so hard.
I'm trying. I'm really trying.
Also, in honor of Marches for Draculas, our pals at Cryptocurium are re-rolling out their Nosferatu figurine, which I love. I haven't got my hands on it yet, but I've got one on order. They've also got a ton of excellent Lovecraft offerings over there. I have two of their Cthulhu idols on the desk.
Yes,
I know you have one as well.
I do. I'm looking right at it.
I got a smaller one that's a little more green. It's really awesome. It's good stuff. We'll link out to all that in the show notes.
It haunts me. This is the first time we've covered Richard Burton Matheson on the show, though we have a lot of love for him this whole time. I've read this book many years ago before we started the podcast, and you are a big fan of his novel Hell House.
Yeah, I love it. I didn't even realize how big of a fan of his I was until I was reading your notes for this episode, because he's done so much great stuff. You kind of take him for granted.
You do. Now, he was born in 1926 in Allendale, New Jersey, to Norwegian immigrant parents, though he was raised by his mother in Brooklyn. He served in the Army in Europe during World War II, and after the war, he attended the Missouri School of Journalism, and afterwards moved to California in 1949. His first novel was Hunger and Thirst, which didn't get published until 2010. So,
wow.
It took a while to make it out.
Yeah.
But his first published story was Born of Man and Woman, which came out in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in 1950. It was about a giant monstrous child chained in the cellar by his parents.
That's so crazy. I was reading your notes here and I immediately had to go look at his biography to find out if he had children yet when he wrote that. You know, sort of like
Oh, right. Yeah.
Lynch's Eraserhead was kind of a reaction to having his own kids. So he did not have children at that point. So that's a good thing. In 1952, Matheson married Ruth Ann Woodson, whom he met in California. They had 4 children: Bettina Mayberry, Richard Christian, Christopher David, and Allie Marie Matheson. Richard, Chris, and Allie became writers of fiction and screenplays themselves. And it's funny because you and I did a recent AMA in which nepotism came up during the show. I was saying, you know, it's dumb to say someone's playing the race card or the gender card or whatever, because from my perspective, I see people playing the nepotism card like it's 52 pickup, you know, and then if they're doing that,
Yes.
you should use what you got. But it probably sounded a little bit like I was against people using the nepotism card, but I'm actually not. It's, you know, I'm for everybody playing all their cards, whatever they may be. Lifetimes are unfortunately very short. And when people go into the family business, I think that helps the craft. And if it's entertainment, it's often to our benefit. Forget about actors and actresses. Just think about John Romita Jr. or Richard Matheson's children, whom I just mentioned, are all really good at what they do. In fact, Richard Christian Matheson wrote the script for The Damned Thing when it was adapted for Masters of Horror. We've covered that story. And I mention it, of course, because my poster Jesus Heist is in that episode.
Yes.
You see how I started this deep and then ended shallow?
Well done. A master stroke.
How is it about me?
Matheson Sr. was in the Southern California Sorcerers in the 1950s and 60s, which was a group of writers that included Ray Bradbury, Charles Beaumont, and a few others. He wrote a lot of short stories over that time into the 70s.
When you wrote that in your notes, you just said the Southern California Sorcerers and moved on. So I was like, what? Who is this organization of wizards? I know about the science fiction society that Ray Bradbury was a part of in LA, but I actually, to my knowledge, hadn't heard of this before.
No, I haven't heard of it until we started doing research on this.
The group's start can be traced all the way back to 1946 when an overly enthusiastic and creative teenager ran into one of his favorite authors at a local bookstore. The two struck up a conversation and a friendship was born. The teenager was Charles Beaumont and the author was Ray Bradbury. I'm getting this info from 32 Days of Halloween, A Brief History of the Southern California Sorcerers by Justin Hamelin on the Mangled Matters blog. And this group, you said some others, it included Matheson, Robert Bloch, Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, and Rod Serling, among others. There's actually a spicy angle on this. The authors would, I'm getting this from the blog, the authors would discuss their latest projects, read excerpts from their finished works, and encourage one another to venture out into the market to sell their books. The group members often collaborated with one another and weren't very discriminatory of where they met. One of my favorite quotes about the group is from founding member George Clayton Johnson. And that name sounded familiar to me. He's one of the co-writers of Logan's Run. So lots of amazing stuff in this group. George Clayton Johnson stated that the group would go to strip joints to watch the stripper strip and be embarrassed to be there, trying to act like college kids. We'd go to nice restaurants or we'd end up somewhere along the beach. It hardly mattered. The fellas just wanted to write. In hindsight, more than a few have argued that without this support group, some of the men involved may not have gone on to achieve the successes they did.
Oh, wow.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. Now, Matheson's short story, The Duel, was adapted as a TV movie by Steven Spielberg, and it was his directorial debut.
Folks mentioned that movie in that respect. It was his first movie or his directorial debut. Almost like it's a novelty, but I love that movie.
It's great. And his first novel was published in 1953, Someone is Bleeding. Other novels he wrote, The Shrinking Man, in 1956, which was adapted, of course, into the movie. The following year, The Incredible Shrinking Man. And, of course, this book, I Am Legend, came out in 1954. It was adapted thrice. First, The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price in 1964, The Omega Man in 1971 with Charlton Heston, and I Am Legend with Will Smith in 2007.
I remember seeing that one and being dumbly excited about the Superman and Batman poster or billboard. You remember that? No, so you've seen that one because I think we saw it together.
Yes, I saw that one, and I saw the Omega Man. I've seen the Omega Man a few times. I have never seen The Last Man on Earth, and maybe in the course of us covering this, I will try and watch it before our next recording. As I read this book, I understand why it's been adapted so many times. It would make an awesome low-budget indie movie. It's nothing really insane happens that you would need to use a big cast or many locations. And it's just really compelling, and I can see why it was adapted. I wish one of those movies adapted it correctly, but...
And to your point, you could do it on a really low budget, but it's scalable too, right? Because of the things that it mentions where you can do it on a very high budget, and that's what the Will Smith movie is. And I think the reason that was disappointment was because it was so good. The decisions they made were really cool in that movie.
Yeah.
It just ended on a bad place. Although I do think there was some testing issues. And there's another ending of that. Yeah.
There was the ending that's much more close to the book, but people didn't like it. So obviously it's a big multi-million-dollar film, and people got to like a Will Smith movie. So they changed the end and kind of took away what I think makes this story amazing.
But I think the other option is available.
Oh, is it?
I think so.
Back to Matheson, he wrote plenty of screenplays. He wrote some teleplays for Have Gun Will Travel and The Lawman, but he wrote for The Twilight Zone, which of course is huge. And he wrote Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, starring William Shatner.
That's such a good episode. And I love the adaptation with Lithgow in the movie, right? Was it Lithgow? Was
yeah.
Fantastic. He also was the screenwriter of Jaws 3D, my brother. A hot August day, an air-conditioned theater. I'm 8 years old. Manimal is in the movie.
Yeah.
Somehow I am intellectually at the perfect place to enjoy this film. Thank you, Richard Matheson. I know that people deride that one, but for an 8-year-old in the summer of 83, it was a time of my life.
Yeah.
Seeing Jaws 3D is one of the greatest movie experiences I've ever had.
Not only does it have Simon McCorkindale in there, it has some other little-known actors. Leah Thompson.
Leah Thompson's in there. You got the Quaid.
Dennis Quaid.
Yeah.
Remember him?
Mm-hmm. The Jaws come out into the audience.
They sure do. Masterpiece. Mwah.
I love it.
Matheson also wrote screenplays of a few Roger Corman movies, including The House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Raven. He also wrote the classic Star Trek episode, The Enemy Within. That's where Kirk got split into two people. One was his aggressive, angry, emotional side, and the other was his very passive, kind side, and how neither of the two sides worked independently, but they needed to be together. Really good episode.
Goosebumps.
In 1973, he wrote the teleplay for The Night Stalker.
Yeah.
The movie pilot for Kolchak, The Night Stalker, and he also wrote the horrifying / hilarious segment from Trilogy of Terror, The Prey.
I mean, just improved my life in a lot of ways. Because that stuff just makes me laugh. You can throw in that little goon running around with this. So funny. You know, The Night Stalker actually wasn't a pilot, though. It was a TV movie, and then it did so well that they made it into a series.
Yeah.
In a couple of movies, but it garnered the highest ratings of any TV film at that time in 1973, which is pretty cool. It's funny, we think now that TV movies were considered sort of lower tier programming, but that's doing a 50% share of the television viewing audience in 1973. Those are like MCU numbers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
More people saw The Night Stalker that year than probably anything that came out at the movie theater.
Yeah.
So he had huge success.
Now, in the 1980s, he also wrote a bunch of episodes of Amazing Stories. And in the 90s, 2 more of his novels were made into movies, What Dreams May Come and A Stir of Echoes. He received the World Fantasy Award for Lifetime Achievement in 1984, the Bram Stoker Award for Lifetime Achievement in 1991. He died days before receiving his Visionary Saturn Award on June 23rd, 2013.
Sucks when anybody dies, but that's a hell of an exit.
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg had this to say about him. Richard Matheson's ironic and iconic imagination created seminal science fiction stories and gave me my first break when he wrote the short story and screenplay for Duel. His Twilight Zones were among my favorites, and he recently worked with us on Real Steel. For me, he is in the same category as Bradbury and Asimov. Spielberg has such a meticulous public persona, and then when he breaks into this podcast, he's so different, doing his bong rips and talking about Boondock Saints and...
Yeah, we really got to make sure that he doesn't get on the show again.
I actually loved Real Steel. I didn't know he was involved in that at all, but he wrote the short story Steel that movie's based on. You've seen that, haven't you?
What is Real Steel?
It's Hugh Jackman and the big boxing robot.
Oh, right. No, I never saw it. It's worth seeing?
It's a great movie. When I saw the trailer, I laughed at it.
Yeah, me too.
I thought it looked so stupid, and then I caught it in a hotel or something that was riveted.
Well, Roger Corman had this to say about him. He said, Richard Matheson was a close friend and the best screenwriter I ever worked with. I always shot his first draft. I will miss him.
A lot of people reading that went, don't you shoot everybody's first draft? Well, whatever. Okay. Thanks, Corman.
This novel, I Am Legend, was first published, as I said, in 1954, and was really the influence behind the whole modern post-apocalyptic zombie setting. George Romero himself even said this.
Yeah. And we talked also on that recent AMA a bit about how John Carter of Mars by Burroughs spawned all of the major media properties, so that when the movie finally came out, it fell a little flat, maybe because the tropes it invented had been played out by its imitators. And so I've never read this book before. I was worried about that going into it.
Yeah.
I have to say, it felt pretty modern. And actually, obviously, there's things going on right now that really, with the pandemic that play into it, being trapped inside and whatnot. But it also didn't spend a lot of times with the tropes I anticipated. The downfall of society and, things that zombie and survival movies kind of fetishize. So let's get into it.
It begins in January 1976, so it's set in the future.
Jaws 3D is still 7 years out. It's a sad time in the real world as well,
Now, as we heard at the top, our protagonist, Robert Neville, doesn't go far from his home on cloudy days because he's been caught out after sunset, and that's not a good thing. The book eases you into the setting and the situation. It gives you little bits. It doesn't flat out say that there are Draculas all over the story, at least not yet.
Yeah, just the garlic and the mirrors. Hints. You're getting the reader in the mindset where Draculas are just old hat, though, because they are to him. Mm-hmm. So, of course, he wouldn't be explicit about it. It's kind of like how Draculas are already old hat to our listeners after the last couple of months. He's in that same situation.
He sure is. So during the day, he has to check on his house to repair any damage that might have been done in the night. He checks on his water tank in the hothouse, which is a greenhouse that is controlled temperature-wise. He explains how he put mirrors on the outside of his house, but they never seem to have any effect. The garlic, however, it works.
We're catching somebody quite a bit after the apocalypse. Also, to our benefit, in a place where he hasn't figured everything out. So there's mystery still there, but we don't have to do all the front loading for the survival story.
It explains how he used to have a cozy bedroom, but now half of his bedroom has been turned into a wood shop. Neville also burned down the houses next to him to stop them from jumping onto his roof. And he has lots of household maintenance that he has to do during the day. He's got things like he should be changing the sheets, doing the dishes, but who cares? He doesn't do those things because he lives alone.
It's got it very cleverly is half zombie movie and half Last Man on Earth. That Last Man on Earth aspect is in a lot of zombie movies, but it's like the one positive thing about that is that there's a little wish fulfillment, and I wish everybody was gone and I could go into their houses and go into the stores and have everything I want.
Yeah.
And have a picnic in the middle of the freeway and shoot a car off a building or whatever I want to do. So there's a little bit of that, but we get the feeling maybe he got that out of his system, or it's just not where his desires lie. However, during the day, he can kind of do anything he wants. At night, it's a siege. The thing that was really clever is, yeah, you could do anything you want during the day, but you kind of just have to work to make the nights livable. Mm-hmm. So it's that wish fulfillment gets killed pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's just drudgery.
At noon, he goes out to the hothouse and he gets some garlic, and it says he used to hate the smell. It would make him sick. Now everything in the house smells like garlic, including himself. Neville has this generator to power up the place, and it seems to always be on the fritz. He keeps most of his food frozen, and a lot of detail on how he preps his food and how he survives. It's very interesting stuff, the way it's written. Yeah. Normally, I would be like, get to the damn vampires, but nope, I am totally intrigued.
Yeah, it's not Mountains of Madness style sort of cataloging.
No.
Things.
Now, the attackers used to throw rocks at the house to break windows, but now he's boarded up the place with 2x4s because he had plywood at one point, but that wasn't doing it. So unfortunately, his house during the day is very dark because all the windows are boarded up. He would string up garlic cloves and hang them over all the windows, and he would have to do this twice a week to freshen up the garlic.
And during the day, he'd make more steaks. No matter how many he makes, he always needs more in his woodshop bedroom. The character's a classical music nut, and when he mentions music in the book, it's specific. And I know that, when I've done a piece of writing and actually called out a piece of music, you kind of hope the reader might throw it on.
Yeah.
So I made a playlist on Spotify and YouTube of the tracks that are mentioned. I've already shared it on social media.
As soon as the light goes and night comes, the vampires come to the house. This day, it's around 6:25, and he hears this guy, Ben Cortman, shouting, "Come out, Neville!"
Nothing's explained yet about that, but Ben Cortman, we can intuit as somebody he knows, and that this is a repetitive occurrence.
Neville has a drink after his dinner, looks over some of medical books. He has some Schoenberg playing really loudly, but it's not loud enough, and he could still hear the vampires out shouting at him.
Who wants to hear loud classical music with the din of screaming people over it? That just sounds so awful. The Schoenberg piece that's mentioned is for Clarté Nacht. In the playlist, I put most of the music chronologically with how it's mentioned in the book, but that one I moved up to the top because it really is a perfect score for the book. It's composed for a sextet. It's very spooky. It's emotional.
Yeah.
It seemed like it could good place to start. Matheson's taste in music is really good. It's funny because the character's kind of a snob about it, so I'm sure that was coming from the author a little bit. He's spinning this up on the record player as he hears them, quote, outside. They're murmuring in their walkings about and their cries. They're snarling and fighting among themselves. Once in a while, a rock or brick thudded off the house. Sometimes a dog barked.
Now, they've been doing this for 5 months, but now he doesn't even look at them. He did make a peephole at one point where he could look and see what they were up to, but the women noticed this and they started striking vile postures in order to entice him out. The women posing like lewd puppets in the night on the possibility that he'd see them and come out. As kind of gross and weird as that is, that they're vampire monsters, it still played on his mind, and he still kind of felt compelled to do it because he's lonely.
Yeah, it was an interesting degree of honesty about this, where he's like, I know it's crude, but you're in such a desperate situation. Maybe in the worst moment, you go, you know what? Just for human contact, let's fake it for a minute and then kill me. I don't care. But thankfully, the vile motions aren't described in detail, so you can put that scene in your mind in however horrific or uncomfortable a way you want. Mm-hmm. Although I wasn't particularly lascivious when I was imagining it because it was also a funny situation, because some of the vampires would probably be better at this than others. I imagine like one vampire is really putting some effort in. She's going for subtlety, a little mystery. Yeah. She takes the first part of the night to choose her outfit. And then this other vampire keeps running up, ripping her pants off, jumping up and down. Let's do sex. Let's do it. Just spoiling the mood. That's the one thing I'd say, but I wish Matheson had explored those two characters I just mentioned more.
Yeah, because they're there. They're in the subtext.
They're there. They're funny. They're quirky.
Now, when it got bad, when the vampires were outside, he would turn the music up so loud that it would hurt his ears, and he would drink a lot. And he hated himself for even thinking about the vampire women that were out there. Neville would study medicine, but they would make so much noise that he couldn't focus on his work, and he could hear Ben Cortman above all of it. And Neville really wanted to stake that guy.
Yeah.
So tomorrow he would soundproof the house. That's what he told himself, but he often did not do it. But he would, every time the night came, he'd go, oh God, I got to do that tomorrow. And he'd procrastinate with it. But that night in particular, they were really getting to him. As he gets ready for bed, he looks at the cross tattoo that he has on his chest. He thinks about how he was a foolish young man when he got that tattoo, when he was drunk in Panama.
So it's an insight into maybe why he survived.
This gets us into chapter 2. His alarm gets him up at 5:30, and there's still some vampires milling around. He could hear Ben Cortman still yelling, "Come out, Neville!" Soon he leaves as well, leaving weaker than when they came, these vampires. Unless they attacked one of their own, they would have some strength, which they often did. And when he goes outside, he sees 2 dead bodies, both women, and he says they were always women. They look drained of blood, and they look pale and horrific. He takes the bodies, he puts them in a tarp, grabs some wooden stakes, and loads up the station wagon. Before he ditches the bodies, he stops at a gas station and siphons off some gas. He checks the oil and everything in the car. He keeps it in good shape. He drives to this huge pit that was dug back in 1975 and was constantly burning and still is, and he throws the bodies in. He hated going to the pit, but he always had bodies to get rid of, and he would think that somewhere in that pit was Kathy.
So clearly this was a public initiative of some kind to deal with vast numbers of dead on a scale that nobody has ever seen, because we're talking about a burning pit done by the government. This is a horrific tragedy has happened.
That's still burning somehow.
It's still burning, yeah.
So he goes to the shop to get some bottled water, and as he does, he decides to see if the owner is up there above the store. Might as well get started.
There were 2 of them. In the living room, lying on the couch, was a woman about 30 years old, wearing a red housecoat. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she lay there, eyes closed, her hands clasped over her stomach. Robert Neville's hands fumbled on the stake and mallet. It was always hard when they were alive, especially with women. He could feel that senseless demand returning again, tightening his muscles. He forced it down. It was insane. There was no rational argument for it. She made no sound except for a sudden, hoarse intake of breath. As he walked into the bedroom, he could hear a sound like the sound of water running. Well, what else can I do? He asked himself. for he still had to convince himself he was doing the right thing.
The second one, they don't describe, but he thinks, why do they always remind me of Kathy? And he wonders why it's only wooden stakes that work, and why the heart. And then he thinks of his father and how he denied the existence of vampires. First use of the word in the book, by the way, when he says vampire here, to the very end. So when this whole plague was going on, his dad was saying, oh, it's not real, it's not happening, it's not vampires, it's something else.
Right. It's cool because that's realistic. If vampires did break out, I mean, how many people would really believe it? And then also, it is the first suggestion that maybe not everybody settled on what this even is, despite the garlic and the crosses.
When he gets to Sears, he says he found 5 in the basement, one asleep in a freezer and another one actually in a coffin. Neville also wonders why garlic affects them as well. The myths aren't quite right. They have reflection in glass. They can't turn into bats or wolves, but there are vampire dogs because he hears them out at night and he's seen them.
Yeah, it sounds like blah, blah, bark, blah, blah, bark.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. So after his lunch, he went house to house and killed vampires, 47 that afternoon.
Gets us into chapter 3 where Neville is reading the novel Dracula, listening to our show, and he hears that quote from Van Helsing, "The strength of the vampire is that no one will believe in him," which we just talked about. Yeah. He's still really bothered by all of this violence. And that day he thinks about the 13 children that he had to kill. Throws the book across the room in anger because it's not helping him. And he can still hear Ben Cortman outside calling to him.
Talking about his dad earlier, not believing in vampires, it really made me think of the vaccine and people, all the stuff that's going on now. There's so many parallels to it, unfortunately, that you can see. And you keep connecting to this. As I was reading it, I was like, oh, yeah, geez.
Yeah, it's coming up soon. But, when they flash back to early days, boy, did that ring true.
Neville considers going out and letting them take him to be one of them, end his suffering. But he still has some hope that there might be others out there. They would be, of course, further than a day's drive away because he can only drive so far that he's got to make sure he can get back to his house. And he swears that he'll kill them all before he gives in. He feels good about his unlimited supply of cigarettes that he keeps in Kathy's room, and that gets him thinking about Kathy. And then he drinks himself stupid that night.
Yeah, Kathy is clearly a daughter.
Yes.
And Virginia being his wife.
Neville thinks about vampires throughout history. Were they so bad, really? And this is what it says here. Is he worse than the parent who gave to society a neurotic child who became a politician? Is he worse than the manufacturer who set up belated foundations with the money he made by handing bombs and guns to suicidal nationalists?
Yeah, to drive by on Tony Stark there.
And the vampires, all they want is to drink blood. So compared to, these humans that were out there doing all these horrible things throughout history, these guys just want some blood.
Hey, that's come up on past marches for Dracula.
Why is the vampire so reviled and hated? They must hide or be destroyed, because that's how it is for the vampires. So throughout history, they've existed. Maybe these vampires aren't actually so bad. Maybe they're victims, and that's why they've been hiding throughout history. But then he dismisses these thoughts, because they're trying to kill him. And he's the last guy on Earth. He hears Ben Cortman out there again. The naked women are rubbing themselves and wanting him and wanting his blood.
Janet's got her nice torch singer outfit on, but look out. Jeanette's doing naked somersaults on the lawn, break dancing with her shirt off. God damn it.
He slams his fist on his leg to break him out of his frustration. But what kind of life is this? And will it ever end? What's the point of killing vamps and drinking yourself silly every night? Maybe he should just give up at some point, and maybe it's now.
Outside, they heard the bar being lifted, and a howl of anticipation sounded in the night. Spinning, he drove his fists one after the other into the wall, until he'd cracked the plaster and broken his skin. Then he stood there, trembling helplessly, his teeth chattering. After a while, it passed. He put the bar back across the door and went into the bedroom. He sank down on the bed and fell back on the pillow with a groan. His left hand beat once, feebly, on the bedspread. Oh, God, he thought. How long? How long?
Well, to answer that question, we're going to end the episode now. That was about as far as we need to go. It's funny when you said, what's the point of killing vamps and drinking yourself silly every night? And I'm sure that at least one person went, I don't know, that sounds pretty cool. It's my life, dude. Killing vamps and drinking myself silly.
Yeah, I had for years, I had a reoccurring dream, and I think it was because of this book, that I was out during the day. I had a dog and a bandolier of steaks, and I was out killing vampires. I didn't actually kill vampires in the dream. It was an anxiety dream. The sun was setting, and I was trying to get back home.
Oh, this really got in there, huh?
Oh, yeah. I kept that was a recurring dream for probably years that I had an anxiety dream, and it was this freaking story that did it to me. I'm sure of it.
I mentioned Richard Matheson's children earlier. You're going to get a letter from them. You owe them some money for all these dreams that...
Wait a minute, huh?
This is intellectual property.
Oh, no.
You're adapting his book into your dreams. That's not cool, man. You got to pay for that.
Yeah, I do.
There's so much going on in here. We're going to have lots to talk about. Like I said earlier, I think this book is really about changing social orders, about how that change is both positive and negative. I doubt we'll get into specifics about actual social changes, but I think that that's what you could take away and think about when you're reading this book. Certainly, it's a fertile field for everybody to discuss. Folks who are not subscribers, there's a lively comment section below each show where you can offer up your thoughts, your corrections, try out lewd attempts to get Lackey out of the house. It's a good space to do that kind of thing.
I want to thank our reader, once again, Eric Peabody.
Check him out at Viking Guitar Productions if you have any audio needs. He's your man. And don't forget to grab that Nosferatu figurine from Crypto Curium. If you buy a lot of them, you could set them up outside, kind of do your own I Am Legend cosplay. Just stay inside and get drunk. That's how I do it. A lot of you are halfway there probably while you're listening right now. We'll be back with more I Am Legend next week. For now, I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And I'm Chris Lackey.
And we're a podcast. We'll talk to you next week.
hppodcraft.com.
Long and the end was kind of vague. Are we still living in the year of the plague? Are we undead? Locked inside. Stay locked inside. Come outside. Not sure what it takes to revive when you're the cats in the boxes, both dead and alive. I don't want to complain. When everyone's in pain. But are we still living in the year of the plague? Are we locked inside? Come outside. Stay locked inside. Come outside. Not sure what it takes to survive when you're the cats in the boxes, both dead and alive.